Hi, and welcome to an edition of The Week Ahead. Theoretically, there are 21 days left in the legislative session, roughly. But we're a long ways away from being finished.
Long ways.
A lot to be done between now and statutory adjournment.
What did you say, 43 divided reports on the calendar this morning?
Just in the Senate.
Just in the Senate.
Yeah.
Good times.
Yeah.
Good times. It really comes down to the budget at this point. The legislature has to enact a budget by the end of this month in order to avoid a fiscal crisis. And at this point, they haven't done it. As a matter of fact, we have problems. The Appropriations Committee met over the weekend, and they have shipped out 3 different reports on the budget: a version by the Senate, by the Democrats, a version by the Senate Republicans, and a version by the House Republicans. And the issue is the 3% in funding of education.
Sure, and I think that's the big issue is within those budgets is the level of increased funding for education. All 3 included an increase in funding for education, but on one side you have the Democrats that have an increase of $325 million, and it starts earlier than the referendum called for, a year earlier in terms of plowing money into education. You have the Senate Republican proposal that proposes to put $100 million into the 18-year budget, which would be a very large increase into education. Then you have the House Republicans with about a $20 million increase. So that kind of puts it all out there in terms of repealing the 3% of where they all stand. So I think they kind of decided it all has to go out and fail, so they come back and kind of negotiate amongst those numbers of what the correct increase to funding of 55%. Now, that being said, statutorily, if you look at what it would cost to fund 55%, I think it's important to note that currently that number would be $94 million on the current statute. So to get to the 55% number under current statute, now there are some proposed, for example, in the Democratic budget, to change what 55% is within the budget, and that's how you get 55% equals 325. So there's a lot of debate going on. It's going to be an interesting couple weeks.
Oh yeah, this weekend they're likely to work all weekend.
Yeah.
And the problem is time isn't on, time isn't on our side.
No, time is not on our side.
If you assume that a budget is going to get vetoed, which is a possibility, you have to make sure you have it down on the governor's desk no later than the 20th of this month to give the full 10 days time frame for which to act on a veto, and bring it back and act on the budget before the 30th. So they really don't have as much time as people think. You could look at it and say, we have 25 days. You really don't. You probably have 15. And that's, in the legislative world, that's not a lot of time. But be that as it may, it's the biggest issue that remains this session. It's the biggest issue of the session. And of course, the legislature, as the nature of the beast is going to end up dealing with this towards the end. In the meantime, there are other pieces of legislation out there. You had a bill on tax.
I had a bill on tax. We just testified in opposition to the bill 1618, LD 1618, on Friday, and it just came up like that. And basically, it was proposed to increase the income tax rate to even more than 10.15. It would go to 16.3 on incomes over $125,000. So it was huge. And we said no. And they wanted to carry the bill over. We said no to that too. So, and actually the committee held a work session right after the public hearing and killed the bill.
They'll have to deal with a companion bill in the next session that was carried over.
Another committee.
And then there was a bill, 1159, mandatory paid sick leave. It will die today between the House and the Senate, and that will be the end. We're still waiting on the minimum wage bills, and we're still waiting on the return of the tip credit. That has not shown up, but I haven't really reviewed today's calendar yet.
And we haven't even started talking about bonds because we don't have a budget yet.
Right.
And that's the discussion that comes after the budget. So there are still a few things left.
And there's a lot of undivided reports, tax havens, local option. There's a ton of just bills on the tape that we're watching between the bodies as they go before. So
it is a busy time. It's the busiest time of the session. It's the time that has the most impact, despite the public hearing process that goes on. This is where the bodies get their opportunities to put their 2 cents worth in on the remaining public policy issues, and they are weighty. So with that, we thank you for joining us for this week's edition of The Week Ahead, and we look forward to talking with you next week.
Stay classy, Maine.